378 people were flying to Hawaii when their engine exploded at 36,000 feet. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that inspectors had seen this coming. Twice. And they did nothing. On February 13th, 2018, 8 years of ignored warnings came due. 378 people were flying peacefully over the Pacific Ocean when their Boeing 777 started tearing itself apart. The right engine didn't just fail, it exploded. The massive fan blade broke free. The protective cowling ripped away completely. What should have been a routine flight to Hawaii became a race against time. Because when an engine destroys itself at 36,000 feet, 120 miles from the nearest runway, there's nowhere to run. This is the story of United Flight 1175 and how a broken system nearly killed 378 people. February 13th, 2018. San Francisco International Airport. Captain Mike Ziedler arrives for what should be a routine flight. He's 57 years old with over 13,000 hours of flight time. Today he's flying one of aviation's workhorses, a Boeing 777-222 with Pratt & Whitney engines. His first officer is 60 years old with over 11,000 hours. Between them, they have decades of experience. This particular aircraft, registration N773UA, has been flying since 1995. United Flight 1175 is bound for Honolulu with 374 passengers and crew aboard. The weather is clear. All systems check normal. The pushback and taxi proceed without incident. At noon local time, the massive Boeing 777 accelerates down the runway and lifts off into the California sky. The flight climbs normally to its cruising altitude of 36,000 feet. Below them stretches the endless blue of the Pacific Ocean. For the passengers, many heading to Hawaii for vacation, it's another peaceful flight over the water. The aircraft settles into its cruise configuration. The autopilot is engaged. Flight 1175 is exactly where it should be, when it should be there. For nearly 5 hours, everything is perfect. 1:02 p.m. Hawaiian time, 120 miles from Honolulu. The Boeing 777 is beginning its descent toward Daniel K. Inouye International Airport. Passengers are starting to catch glimpses of the Hawaiian Islands through their windows. The flight attendants are preparing the cabin for arrival. In the cockpit, the pilots are running through their normal descent checklist. The first officer is flying. The captain is monitoring. There's even a third pilot in the jump seat, an off-duty United 777 first officer riding along. Then, it happens. A violent jolt rocks the aircraft. A sound like an explosion echoes through the cabin. The plane immediately begins shaking with extreme vibrations that feel like the aircraft is tearing itself apart. The autopilot disconnects instantly. The Boeing 777 starts rolling to the right. Warning lights flood the cockpit. The engine instruments for the number 2 engine, the right engine, show complete failure. The captain takes control. They have seconds to understand what's happening before the situation becomes catastrophic. Through the cockpit windows, they can see something that should be impossible. The right engine is oscillating wildly. Large pieces of the engine nacelle, the protective cowling that surrounds the engine, are completely missing. But they can't see the full extent of the damage. Not yet. The captain directs the off-duty pilot to go back into the cabin and assess the condition of the engine. What he sees through the passenger windows defies belief. The engine's protective cowling has been torn away completely. Massive sections of the inlet and fan cowl are simply gone. The engine's internal components are exposed and vibrating violently as air rushes over them at 500 miles per hour. He takes a video to show the pilots what they're dealing with. When they see the footage, they understand the gravity of their situation. Their aircraft has suffered what's called an uncontained engine failure. Instead of keeping the destruction inside the engine case, the failure has broken through and damaged the surrounding structure. The pilots declare an emergency and begin the severe engine damage checklist. They shut down the right engine completely. The vibration subsides, but the aircraft's handling is severely compromised. They have one engine and 120 miles to fly. Below them is nothing but ocean. The approach to Honolulu is unlike anything these experienced pilots have ever faced. The aircraft wants to roll right because of the massive drag from the destroyed engine. Every control input requires compensation for the asymmetric forces. But these are skilled professionals. They configure the aircraft for a single-engine approach. The remaining engine is running normally. The flight controls are responding. 40 minutes after the explosion, United Flight 1175 touches down safely on runway 8R at Honolulu International Airport. Emergency vehicles surround the aircraft immediately. All 378 people on board walk away uninjured. But investigators are about to discover that this near disaster was entirely preventable. The investigation into United Flight 1175 begins immediately. The National Transportation Safety Board dispatches a team to examine the failed engine and determine what caused such a catastrophic failure. What they find in the wreckage tells a disturbing story. The engine's fan, the large spinning disc at the front that draws air into the engine, has suffered a complete blade failure. Fan blade number 11 has fractured completely, breaking away from its mounting and destroying everything in its path. When investigators examine the fractured blade under a microscope, they discover something alarming. The break didn't happen suddenly. It started as a small crack that grew over time through what's called low cycle fatigue. Every time the engine started up, the blade flexed slightly. Every shutdown, it relaxed. Over thousands of cycles, microscopic cracks can develop and grow until the blade finally breaks apart. But here's the crucial detail. The crack was detectable. It should have been caught during routine inspections. The investigation reveals that this particular blade had been through 2 major overhauls at Pratt & Whitney's facility in Connecticut. During both overhauls, the blade underwent a specialized inspection called thermal acoustic imaging, or TI. TI is designed specifically to find internal cracks in hollow fan blades. Sound waves excite the blade's structure, and thermal sensors detect the tiny amounts of heat generated by cracks moving against each other. The records show that during the 2010 TAI inspection, there was a small thermal indication at the exact location where the blade would eventually fail. In 2015, during the final inspection before the failure, there was an even larger indication in the same spot. Both times, the inspector attributed the indication to an issue with the paint that was used during the TAI process. The blade was returned to service with a growing crack that would eventually kill it. But how did trained inspectors miss such critical evidence? Twice? The answer reveals a shocking breakdown in aviation safety oversight. Pratt & Whitney developed the TAI inspection process in 2005. For over a decade, they classified it as new and emerging technology. This classification allowed them to avoid developing formal training programs, certification requirements, or oversight procedures that applied to other inspection methods. The inspector who worked on the United Airlines blade had about 34 years of experience at Pratt & Whitney. He was highly skilled in traditional inspection methods, but for TAI, he received only 40 hours of on-the-job training. Compare that to other inspection techniques. Eddy current inspection requires 40 hours of classroom training plus 1,200 hours of practical experience. Ultrasonic inspection requires 40 hours of classroom training plus 1,600 hours of practical experience. For TAI, arguably more complex than either of these methods, the inspector got 40 hours total and no formal certification. Even worse, the inspector never received feedback on his decisions. When he flagged a blade as potentially cracked, it went to engineers for further evaluation. But he never learned whether his rejections were valid or false positives. He was making life-or-death decisions in an information vacuum. The investigation also reveals problems with the inspection facility itself. The TAI room had large windows that let in afternoon sunlight, creating false thermal images. The air conditioning couldn't maintain proper temperatures during summer months. Workers from the hot shop floor would come into the room to cool off, their body heat interfering with the thermal sensors. These weren't minor inconveniences. They were safety hazards that made accurate inspection nearly impossible. By 2018, when United Flight 1175 suffered its engine failure, Pratt & Whitney had inspected over 9,000 fan blades using TAI. Yet they still classified it as new and emerging technology. The blade that nearly killed 378 people had shown clear signs of failure for 8 years. The inspection system designed to catch these problems had failed completely. The engine failure itself reveals another critical design flaw that almost turned a survivable incident into a catastrophe. When fan blade number 11 broke apart, it created what engineers call a fan blade out event. The engine case is designed to contain such failures and prevent debris from escaping. The engine DII'd to contain the blade fragments, but the secondary effects were devastating. The broken blade created a massive imbalance that sent shock waves through the entire engine structure. These displacement waves were far more powerful than the engine's supporting structures could handle. The inlet, the large duct that guides air into the engine, was constructed with a carbon fiber bulkhead. During the original engine certification tests, Boeing had used an aluminum bulkhead that could flex and absorb the shock waves. But the production aircraft used carbon fiber, which is lighter but more brittle. When the displacement waves hit the carbon fiber bulkhead, it failed catastrophically. The inlet broke apart and separated from the aircraft. Without the inlet's support, the fan cowls, the protective shells around the engine, also broke away and fell into the Pacific Ocean. This cascading failure exposed the engine's internal components to massive aerodynamic forces. The engine began oscillating violently, creating additional stress on the aircraft's wing and potentially threatening the structural integrity of the airplane. If the engine mount had failed, the entire engine could have separated from the wing. At that point, the aircraft would have become uncontrollable. The pilots of United Flight 1175 had no way of knowing how close they came to losing their airplane entirely. The aftermath of United Flight 1175 led to immediate action across the aviation industry. Pratt & Whitney launched an emergency review of all 9,606 fan blades that had undergone TAI inspection. They discovered additional blades with questionable indications that had been returned to service. On March 22, 2019, the FAA issued an airworthiness directive requiring enhanced inspection procedures for all PW4000 engines with hollow fan blades. Airlines were required to perform TAI inspections at shorter intervals and with improved procedures. Pratt & Whitney finally developed formal training and certification programs for TAI inspectors. They upgraded the inspection facility, installed proper lighting controls, and implemented temperature management systems. Most importantly, they established feedback systems so inspectors could learn from their decisions and improve their accuracy over time. Boeing redesigned the inlet attachment system for future engines, incorporating lessons learned about displacement wave effects and bulkhead materials. But these changes came too late for the passengers of United Flight 1175. The investigation's final report delivers a scathing assessment of the failures that led to the incident. The fracture of a fan blade due to Pratt & Whitney's continued classification of the TAI inspection process as a new and emerging technology that permitted them to continue accomplishing the inspection without having to develop a formal, defined initial and recurrent training program or an inspector certification program. In other words, corporate bureaucracy and cost-cutting nearly killed 378 people. The inspector who missed the crack wasn't incompetent. He was failed by a system that prioritized schedule and cost over safety. He was asked to make critical decisions without proper training, adequate facilities, or meaningful feedback. For over a decade, warning signs accumulated. The technology existed to prevent this failure. The knowledge existed to interpret the test results correctly. But the will to implement proper safety procedures did not exist until after 378 people almost died over the Pacific Ocean. United Flight 1175 represents both the best and worst of modern aviation. The worst, systemic failures in safety oversight that allowed a known problem to persist for years. The best, the skill and professionalism of pilots who saved every life on board when the system failed them. The passengers who walked away from that Honolulu runway owe their lives to Captain Zeidler and his crew. But they also owe their terror to an industry that let bureaucracy override basic safety principles. Today, every PW4000 engine undergoes enhanced inspection procedures. Every TAI operator receives comprehensive training and certification. The inspection facilities meet strict environmental standards. These improvements exist because 378 people experienced 40 minutes of terror over the Pacific Ocean. They exist because skilled pilots refused to let a broken system claim their passengers' lives. But the deeper question remains: how many other critical systems in aviation rely on inadequate training, poor oversight, and bureaucratic classifications that prioritize cost over safety? United Flight 1175 exposed a culture where new and emerging technology became an excuse to avoid responsibility, where inspectors made life-or-death decisions without proper training or feedback, where warning signs were dismissed for 8 years because acknowledging them would be expensive. The passengers who deplaned in Honolulu that day had no idea how close they came to becoming another aviation statistic. They trusted the system to keep them safe. The system failed them completely. Only the skill of their pilots stood between them and the Pacific Ocean. The engine that destroyed itself over Hawaii had been crying out for help for nearly a decade. The technology existed to hear its warnings. The knowledge existed to interpret them correctly. What didn't exist was the will to act on that knowledge until 378 people almost paid the ultimate price. In aviation, as in life, the most dangerous failures are often the ones we see coming but choose to ignore. United Flight 1175 reminds us that in the sky, there are no second chances when those ignored warnings finally come due. The blade that should have been caught is now a piece of evidence in an NTSB warehouse. The people it nearly killed are home with their families, largely unaware of how close they came to disaster. And somewhere else in the aviation system, other warning signs are being ignored. Other inspections are being rushed. Other cost-cutting measures are being justified. Until the next time the impossible happens at 36,000 feet. If this investigation into aviation safety opened your eyes to the hidden dangers in our skies, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the stories that changed aviation forever. What other incidents would you like us to investigate? Let us know in the comments below.